Hello, beautiful people. I'm going to be reading Pride and Prejudice, Volume 2, Chapter 18. Let's start now. The first week of their return was soon gone. The second began, and it was the last of the regiment's stay in Meryton, and all the young ladies in the neighborhood were drooping apace. The dejection of almost universal. The elder Miss Banners alone when still able to eat and drink and sleep and pursue the usual reapproach for this for this insensibility by Katie and Lydia, whose own misery was extreme and who could not comprehend such heartedness in any of the family. Good heaven, what is it, what is to become us of us? What are we to do? Would they often acclaim in the bitterness of woe? How can you be willing so, Lizzie, the affectionate mother, share, shared all their grief? She remembered what she had herself endured on a similar occasion 25 years ago. I am sure, said she, I cried for 2 days together when Colonel Mellors, Mel regiment went away. I thought I should have broke my heart. I'm sure I should break mine, said Lydia. If one if one could but go to Brighton, observed Mrs. Bennet. Oh yes, if one could but go to Brighton. But Papa is so disagreeable. A little sea bathing would set me up forever. And my Auntie Phillips is sure it would do me a great deal of good, added Kitty. Such were the kind of lamentations resounding perpetually through Longbourn House. Elizabeth tried to be deserted by them, and all the sense of pleasure was lost in shame. She felt anew she felt anew the justice of Mr. Darcy's objections, and never had she before been so much disposed to pardon his interference in the view of his friend. But the gloom of Lydia's protest was shortly cleared away, for she received an invitation from Mrs. Foster and the wife of Colonel of the regiment to accomplish, accompany her to Brighton, and this invaluable friend was very young woman and very lately married. A resentment in good manner and good spirit had recommended her and Lydia to each other, and out of their 3 months' acquaintance they had been intimate too. The rapture of Lydia and of this occasion, her adoration and Miss oh my goodness, Miss Foster, she delights of Miss Bennet, and the mortifi- oh my mortification of Kitty are scarcely to be described. Wait, wholly inactive, a- attentive to her sister feeling. Lydia flew about the house in restless ecstasy, calling for everyone's congratulations and laughing, talking with more volume than ever, while the luckless Kitty continued in the parlor, repining at her fate in terms as unreasonable as her accent was peevish. I cannot see why Mrs. Foster should not ask me as well as Lydia, said she. Though I am not her particular friend, I have just as much right to be asked as she has, and more too, for I am 2 years older. In vain did Elizabeth attempt to make her reasonable, and Jane to make her resign. As for Elizabeth herself, this invitation was far from exciting in her the same feelings as in Mother and Lydia, and as she considered it as the death warrant of all possibility of common sense for the letter, and detestable as such a step must make her were a known. She could not help secretly advising her father not to let her go. She represented to him all the improprieties of Lydia's general behavior, the little advantage she could de- deride from the friendship of such a woman as Mrs. Foster, and the possibility of her being yet more imprudent with such a companion at Brighton, where the temptations must be greater than at home. He heard her attentively and then said, Lydia will never be easy till she has exposed herself in some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with so little expense of inconvenience to her family as under the present circumstances. If you were aware, said Elizabeth, of a very great disadvantage to us all, which must arise from the public notice of Lydia's unguarded and prudent manner, nay, which has already risen from it, I'm sure you will judge differently in the affair. Already risen, repeated Mr. Bennet. What has she frightened away some of your lovers, poor little Lizzie? But do not be cast down. Such quaint misuse as quaint misuse as cannot bear to be connected with a little absurdity, and at what regret come. Let me see the list of the pitiful fellow who have been kept aloof by Lydia's folly. Indeed, you are mistaken. I have no such injuries to resent. It is not a particular, but of general evil, and I am now complaining our importance and respectability in the world must be affected by the wide variety and assurance and disdain of all the restraint which mark Lydia's character. Excuse me, for I must speak plainly. If you and my dear father would not take the trouble of checking her indoberant spirit, and of her teaching that her present pursuits are not to be the business of her life, she will soon be fixed the reach of amendment, and her character will be fixed, and she will at 16 be the most determined flea that ever made herself and her family ridiculous. A flirt too, in the worst and meanest degree of flirtation, without any attraction beyond youth, and a tolerable person, and from the ignorance and emptiness of her mind, really enabled to ward off any portion of that universal contempt with her rage for admiration would excite. In this danger, Kitty is also comprehended. She will follow whenever Lydia leads, vain, ignorant, idle, and absolutely untruthful. Untruthful. Oh, my dear father, can you suppose it possible that they will not be consured and despised wherever they are known, and that their sisters will not be often involved in the disgrace? Mr. Bennet saw that her whole heart was in the subject, and affectionately taking her hands, said in reply, do not make yourself uneasy, my love. Whenever you and Jane are known, you must be respected and valued. You will not appear to a less advantage of having a couple, or may say three very silly sister, we shall have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton. Brighton, let her go then. Colonel Fish, Colonel Foster is a responsible man and will keep her out of any real mischief, and she's likely too poor to be an object of prey to anybody. At best, then, she would be less of importance, even as a common flirt, than she has been there. The officer will find women better, wealthier, notice it as hope, therefore that her being there may teach her her own insignificance. At any rate, she cannot grow many degrees worse without authorizing us to lock her up for the rest of her life. With this answer, Elizabeth was forced to be content, and her own opinion continued the same, and she left him disappointed and sorry. It was not in her nature, however, to increase her vaccination by drawing on them. She was confident of having performed her duty, and to fret over unavoidable evils and augment them by anxiety with no part of her deposition. Had Lady and her mother known the substance of her confidence with her father, and their indignation would hardly have found expression in their united volubility. In Lydia's imagination, a visit to Bryston compromised every possibility of earthly happiness. She saw with the creative eye of fancy, and the street of that gay bathing place covered with officers. She saw herself the object of attention to tens and to scores of them at present unknown. She saw all the glories of the camp. It stands stressful in beauteous uniformity of light, crowded with the young and the gaze and the dazzling with scarlet, and to complete the view, she saw herself seated beneath a tent, tenderly flirting with at least six officers at once. Had she known that her sister fought to tear her from such prospect and such reality as these, what would have been her sensation? They could have they could have been understood only by her mother, who might have felt nearly the same. Lydia going to Bryston was all that consoled her from the melancholy conviction of her husband never intended to go there himself, but they were entirely ignorant of what they had passed, and their raptures continued with little intermission to the very day of Lydia returning home. Elizabeth was glad to see Mr. Wickham for the last time, having been frequently in company with him since her return. Agitation was pretty well over, and the agitation of formal partiality entirely so. She had even learnt to detect in the very gentlest which had first delighted her in affect affect affectation, and a saneness to discuss and worry. In her in his present behaviour to herself, moreover, she had a fresh source of displeasure for the inclination he soon testified of renewing those attentions which had marked the early part of their acquaintance, could only serve after what had since passed to provoke her. She lost all the concern from for him in finding herself thus selected as the objects of which Adele and full volumed gallantry, while she steadily repressed it, could not but feel the reproof contained in his behaviour, and however long, for whatever cause, his attention had been withdrawn, and her vanity would be gratified and preference secure at any time by their renewal. On the very last day of the regiment's remaining in Meryton, he dined with others of the officers at Longbourn, and so little was Elizabeth disposed to part from him in good manner, and that on his making some inquiry as to the manner in which her time had passed, and henceforth she mentioned Colonel Fitzwilliams and Mr. Darcy having both spent 3 weeks in Rosen, and asked him if he were acquainted with the former. He looked surprised, pleased, alarmed, but with a moment of recollection and a returning smile, replied that he had formerly seen him often, and after observing that he was very gentlemanlike man, asked her how she had liked him. Her answer was warmly in his favour, with an air of indifference. He soon afterward added, "How long did you say that he was at Rosen?" "Nearly 3 weeks." "And you saw him frequently?" "Yes, almost every day. His manners are very different from his cousin's." "Yeah, very different. But I think Mr. Darcy improves on Constance." "Indeed," cried Wickham with a look which did not escape her. And pray may I ask," but checking himself, he added in a gayer tone, "it is in address that he improves. Has he deigned to add sort of civility to his ordinary style? For I dare not hope," he continued in a lower and more serious tone, "that he has improved in essentials." Essentials. "Oh no," said Elizabeth. "In essential, I believe he is very much what he ever was." It's still on. Usually it turns on. Yeah. Oh wait, let's continue. Essentials. "Oh no," said Elizabeth. "In essential, I believe he is very much what he ever was." While she spoke, Wickham looked as if scarcely knowing whether to rejoice over her words or to trust their meaning. There was a something in her countenance which made him listen with an apprehensive and anxious attachment, while she added, "When I said that he improved on Constance, I did not mean that either his mind or manners were in a state of improvement, but that from knowing him better his disposition was better understood." Wickham's alarm now appeared in a heightened complexion and agitated look. For a few minutes he was silent, still shaken off his embarrassment. He turned to her and said in a gentleness of accent, "You who so well know my feelings towards Mr. Darcy will readily comprehend how si- sincerely I must rejoice that he is wise enough to assume even the appearance of what is vice. His pride in that direction may be of service, if not to himself, to maybe others, for it must deter him from such foul misconduct as I have suffered by. I only fear that the sort of cautiousness to which you, I imagine, have been alluding is merely adopted on his visits to his aunts." of whom good opinion and judgment he stands mass in will, and his fear of her has always operated, and I know when they were together a good deal is to be imputed to his wish of forwarding a match with Miss de Boer, which I am certain he has very much at heart. Elizabeth could not suppress a smile at this, but she answered only by a slight inclination of the head. She saw that he wanted to engage her on the whole subject of his grievances, and she was no she was in no manner to indulge him, and the rest of the evening passed with the appearance on his side of usual cheerfulness, but with no further attempt to distinguish Elizabeth, and they parted at last with mutual civility and possibly a mutual desire of never meeting again. When the party broke up, Lydia returned with Miss Foster to Meryton, from whence they were to set out early the next morning. The separation between her and the family was rather noisy and pat- pathetic. Kitty was the only one who shed tears, but she did weep from vex- vexation. She did weep from vexation and envy. Miss Bennet was diffuse in her good wishes for the felicity of her daughter, and impressive in her injunctions that she would not miss the opportunity of enjoying herself as much as possible. Advice which was every reason to believe would be attended to, and in the clamorous happiness of clamorous happiness of Lydia herself, in bidding forth well, and the more gentle adieus to her sisters were uttered without being heard. I'm done. I'm so proud of myself. This is such a long read. I was reading fast too. Yeah, I was reading fast, but I'm proud of myself. Oh my gosh, should I read this? Volume 2. Look, this and then volume 3. I'm gonna read it tomorrow. Yeah. It will be kind of fun to start You know what? I'll read it tomorrow. Yeah. When I'm done with this volume 3. This tomorrow. I'll read this tomorrow and then boom, volume 3. I'm proud of myself. Yeah. I hope you guys have a nice day. Bye bye.